I was completely shocked that it's more prevalent than autism, for example, because autism is this huge thing, and same with
Mhm.
ADHD, and
Mhm.
it's just as
Yeah.
prevalent, if not more prevalent.
The current research for the states is 7.1%, translates to 1 in 14.
That means two in every
Yeah,
classroom.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
It's crazy when you think about it.
yeah. Or 2 in every boardroom. All right, welcome to Living with FASD, Todd Capes. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah, so I can tell from your accent you're from the other side of the pond. What are you doing over there? You're in
It's
school, right?
Yeah, so I'm in university. I'm studying my
Uh-huh.
PhD. I'm in the
Uh-huh.
second year, and my thesis is entitled "Differentiating Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders from Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, a computational and behavioral approach." So
Okay.
basically, we're looking at how to basically improve differential diagnosis between FASD and ADHD.
And to bring clarity to the is it one or the other or is it both?
So we're actually
Um,
doing kind of a mix between everything. So we've got an FASD group, an FASD and ADHD group, and then we've got an ADHD group that's medicated, an ADHD group that's not medicated,
oh
and then a
wow.
control sample. So we've got the
Whole
whole
gamut. Yeah. So your
constellation.
control sample are people who do not have either one?
Yep, either one or
Okay.
suspected, or have any sort of, neurological damage related to attention or decision
Okay.
making.
Okay. Awesome. So what got you interested in working with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders?
So originally I did my undergraduate just in psychology. Really enjoyed the research aspect of it. Went away for 6 months to try psychology hands-on, worked with people with challenging behavior, autism, ADHD more so.
Mhm.
Um, I still had that sort of research passion, so I did what we call a volunteer research assistant scheme here at BCU after I left university, which was a systematic review on the differences between FASD and ADHD. And then my supervisor at the time was like, "We've got a PhD coming up. Would you want to apply?" And I was like, "I've really enjoyed working with people with ADHD, but this isn't for me, the hands-on. I think I prefer
Mhm.
the research side." So came back
Mhm.
to do my PhD, and here I am.
Okay. All right. Well, it's work that we desperately need. And you may chuckle at this. I'm late to the party in terms of realizing that I'm on the spectrum. I was 56 when I self-identified, and I was 60 when that was confirmed in a diagnosis of NDPAE. And I had told the woman who provided the diagnosis for me, I said, I've been learning a little bit about women in particular being diagnosed with ADHD very late in life, and I'm really suspecting it because I describe myself oftentimes as a professional squirrel chaser.
Hmm.
Hold that thought, I'm gone. And if I'm lucky, I can recoup that thought. But anyway, she deferred to someone else to make that an official diagnosis, but indicated that it would not surprise her at all. And I was telling a colleague of mine at work, we became fast friends, and gosh, I haven't had that job in many years, but she's like, I knew from the minute I met you that you had ADHD. But I understand that the comorbidity rate is very, very high. Some say as high as 90% with FASD also have the ADHD. Do you have a sense that maybe a lot of the ADHD is misdiagnosed FASD, or what's your finger on that pulse at the moment?
So this is going to co come as probably no surprise. I don't actually know myself. I'm kind of 50-50 in both camps. I've read some research that
Okay.
says that FSD can cause, or prenatal alcohol exposure can cause ADHD. ADHD can be used to identify prenatal alcohol exposure, and it's kind of, I don't know yet.
Yeah. Okay.
The prevalence of ADHD and FSD is about 50% from
Okay.
most research, but I have seen it as low as 30, as high as 70 to 90. But honestly, I don't know. That's
Okay.
a question I've got to
Okay.
answer myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, I
hopefully my
hope
research will.
we'll bear that out. That would be very,
Hmm.
very good. I'm sure you've seen the Lay of the Land study that came out from the adult leadership collaboration of the FASD changemakers with all the comorbidities. Have you seen that study or that
Who's this
survey?
study by?
I think it was done out of Canada.
Was it by
But
somebody called Clark? I think I've read that one. I don't know
I
if I've read the specific one you're
Yeah, I'm not sure
referencing.
who the university people were on the
Mhm.
team, but there were several members of the adult leadership collaboration. In other words, the FASD change makers are like their informal thing is nothing about us without us.
Yeah,
Being tired of being brought into a room, say, here's some people with FASD, now go away, little children, while the grown-ups talk. And
yeah,
so they're really hands-on in helping shape what direction the research is going, but they're very involved with this conference. It was I think it was was it the BC? It was a Canadian conference for a long time, and now it's 2 years now in Seattle. So anyway, they started this survey of, I think it was over 500 adults living with FASD because of all the different medical conditions that some of them had, and around the table when they were having dinner at a conference. It was like, oh, I've had that. Oh, I've had that. Oh, I've had that. And just, they had so many things in common. They decided to do a survey on it, and that was quite informative. The more research we can get into these comorbid conditions and understand them better, in some cases, it may not be that important, which comes first, the chicken or the
hmm
egg.
yeah,
But it would be really nice to know the how, right? So, in which case, you hinted at that. Some are saying that prenatal alcohol exposure may cause ADHD. And I think there's something to that because so many of us, it's a classic symptom that in the FASD side of things, so many of us have.
yeah.
Yeah. Tell me, how long has the research you've been doing, how long has that been going on? And where are you in terms of, are you halfway done where you want to go? Just talk to us about the process and where you
So we
are.
started the project it was about June, July sort of time, sort of mid-year. We've had brilliant uptake with recruiting health controls, people with ADHD, medicated and not medicated. I've had, I think it's 6 people with FASD, 6 adults so far take part out of 50. I mean, we can reduce, obviously, take out the comorbid FSD and ADHD group if we need to, if we can't recruit. Hopefully the idea is to hopefully recruit
Yeah.
enough for each so we can kind of have more results to go off. But pretty much almost complete with the control sample and the ADHD sample. It's just recruiting adults with FASD has been particularly challenging, especially obviously because we don't have the infrastructure in terms of research over here in the UK. Obviously we've got Salford, and I've reached out to
Yeah.
Salford, and yeah, some of those are having difficulties recruiting adults as well. But thankfully for the children's study, we're working with a clinic, so we'll have
Okay.
an easier sort of
Yeah.
access to
Yeah.
find these potential participants.
Okay. So you're still really on, you've done a lot of the work ahead of time, paperwork wise, in terms of what are we going to look at, how are we going to structure
Yeah,
it, and that's a lot of work too.
yeah,
That's
it is
a lot of work. I think people don't really, they kind of take for granted, that, oh,
yeah,
here it is, but nobody handed this to you. You had to create it.
yeah.
And that takes a lot of thought and mental effort, and thinking
100%.
about all the things that, but you can play what if forever, right? So you're in that first step of just collecting people to participate.
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially we're nearly done apart from the recruiting the FASD. And
Okay.
then the children's study obviously launches in the new year at the end of January.
Okay.
So that would be an interesting one as well.
Okay. So tell us about someone like me were to say, hey, Todd, I want to participate. I want to be one of your guinea pigs. What are you going to have me do?
So essentially, it's a supervised study. So I'm there the whole time on a video call. It'd be either on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. You presented the study on an experimental software we use called Gorilla. There's 3 different tasks. We have one on attention, 2 on decision making.
Okay.
The attention task is basically finding a blue square amongst green triangles, green squares, measuring selective attention. Then we
Okay.
also have a decision-making task that looks at effective learning, so basically your ability to use your emotions to improve decision making. And we have another task where you basically pump up a balloon without the balloon exploding to try and win as many points as possible,
Okay.
and that measures risk taking. So we just kind of sort of plot the differences because there was previous research that showed for the attention task that we're using. If people with ADHD can typically do part one and part two,
Mm-hmm.
whereas people with FASD can usually do part one, but struggle with part two. So you can kind of see the differences, and
Mm-hmm.
then the same with the one decision making task where it's about the cards. They typically don't tend to learn across the task and will continuously to select the riskier choices.
Okay.
Whereas people with ADHD will typically be able to learn that these cards are bad and these ones are the good ones,
Mm-hmm.
without giving too much away in case anyone wants to
Yeah.
participate.
Yeah.
I've got to be
Yeah.
careful with what I say.
Well, I mean, just, it's kind of like going to a doctor. What's this going to be like, right?
Yeah.
Being forewarned is being forearmed.
But yeah,
If
we
if we
provide
can settle down any anxiety, then you're going to get our best selves. So,
100%, and
yeah.
we have like
Yeah.
a full participant information sheet what outlines everything in probably slightly more detail than I've just said it in, just to outline everything without giving away the whole purpose of
Right.
the
Right.
experiment.
Right.
Gives a bit more of a background, what are the risks, what are the ins and outs,
Right.
etc., etc.
Right. Yeah. One risk being your eyes could get tired from reading everything.
Yeah,
I've
that's why
actually seen.
we've got plenty of breaks in between. Between every task, we've got a 10-minute break.
Yeah. Okay. So how long of a time commitment would someone need to be able to give you?
It's just a 1 hour session, one
Okay.
off. Usually it's taking people between sort of 45 to 50 minutes, but I say an hour just in case people want extra
Okay.
breaks, they want X, Y,
Right.
and Z, need longer to read the information sheet, the debrief, etc., etc.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Now, does someone have to have an FASD diagnosis confirmed, or can they be like me, recognize so much of it in oneself that they're comfortable saying, yeah, I think I have it, or someone just suspecting, that they have a history of making bad decisions and they believe, that their mother could have been drinking, but they don't know, or like adoptees, they won't have that information.
And just for the purpose of this study, we're going based off the confirmed diagnosis of
Okay.
an FASD. It can be any type, whether you use, obviously the Canadian guidelines, whether you use ARND,
Okay.
PFAS, FAS, etc., etc. You can
I
have
know
any
there's
of
so
those.
many.
There's too many to list.
Right?
But it's got to be a confirmed diagnosis. Same with
Okay.
ADHD. We're doing off the base of confirmed diagnosis.
Okay.
Obviously, medication self-reported, whether you take it or not, but we're going off the base of confirmed diagnosis just to keep it standard
Right.
for
Right.
everybody.
Okay. Now, how can someone reach out to you to get that information or to sign up?
So we have, I post a lot on LinkedIn. There's always an advert, usually once a week, once a month sort of time frame. Whenever I remember to repost it to try and look for some more participants, or you can contact me on email. Yep, that's
Yeah.
perfect. Feel free to just reach out by email. I'll get back to you in probably 12, 24 hours tops.
Okay. But
I'm
you're not
fairly
eager at
active.
all.
No, not one bit. Not eager one bit.
Okay. So
Um,
you and I met through a mutual acquaintance, Antonia
yep,
Rathbone Lindsay. She's a dear, dear friend of mine. So she mentioned, I think it was yesterday, that she had been exchanging papers with you, your research papers,
yep,
that kind of thing, and that you had talked to her about executive function skills breaking down into two categories of hot and cold.
yep.
And even though my master's is in psych, I had never heard that before. So I'm going to be learning about that along with anyone in the audience that wants to keep listening and doesn't want to tune out just because, oh, we got the research info. Bye bye. But I'm a lifelong learner, three masters, three. Yes, three, not enough. But so my education now is quite a bit through the guests that I bring on, talk about what's up, what's coming, what's going on. So talk to us about this hot versus cold executive functioning.
So I'll give some background first. So executive functions are basically the cognitive processes behind kind of everything we do. They're able to basically represent a goal and then give the means to basically achieve that goal, if that makes sense. And so you have three of them. So you have working memory, which is the ability to basically hold information temporarily and manipulate it in some kind of way. You have cognitive flexibility, which is your ability to basically switch between different mental sets in a flexible approach. And then you also have behavioral inhibition, which is your ability to basically suppress, emotional responses to certain things, essentially. But the interesting thing about this theory, proposed by Zalazzo, is that it breaks it down into your cold executive functions and your hot executive functions. What we mean by cold is that they basically, cold executive functions are used for decontextualized problems that require sort of like a logical or a mechanistic approach when there's no emotional influence. So you don't have like, you want to go to the shop for some sweets because they taste nice. The taste nice is the emotional
Yeah.
component, and that's why you're making that decision. Whereas hot executive functions are basically used for problems that require a flexible appraisal because of the emotional or motivational or both
Okay.
influences. They are distinct in terms of concepts, like you can break them down. Factor analysis has done it. There's been lesion studies that have shown when you damage different parts of the brain, you can do cold executive function tasks, but not hot, for example. But in everyday life, you'll typically never see them separated, or very, very rarely will they be, distinctly cold or distinctly hot. The interesting part about the hot executive functions, though, is that they're more linked to problematic behaviors like criminality, for example, or like antisocial behavior. And what I noticed was we don't know a lot about hot executive functions in FASD. There's only a few tasks that have really stood out to me where there's one paper that basically goes through all the tasks and all the different parts of the brain. And there's one fantastic study in 2000 that looked at children and adolescents with FASD and compared them on a hot executive function task called the Iowa gambling task, which measures effective learning, decision making, and risk taking. And what it found was that children with and adolescents with FASD typically would continue to select the riskier options and wouldn't
Mhm.
learn across the trials, whereas controls, because they didn't have the same damage to the brain, would continue to, well, would start by selecting randomly. They then
Mhm.
would notice the riskier cards and then they would switch across the task and they would positively like learn across the task
Mhm.
that these cards are better and they would make less risky decisions and be able to use them, effective
Right.
states to
Right.
basically improve their decision making.
And that would tie in with generalizing knowledge, like learning in one situation, being able to apply that learning in other situations. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the good thing about the Iowa gambling test that they use is it's decision making under uncertainty. So you
Mm-hmm.
never know the outcome of the deck before you select it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
you select a deck and then you get the feedback back. But obviously then you take that into the next trial. So there is a slight conditioned response, but it's
Mm-hmm.
random every time
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to me. There's also other tasks like theory of mind, for example, like faux pas tasks, where you basically measure the ability to understand that you've unintentionally caused like embarrassment to somebody else, or trying to think of some other tasks off the top of my head. I've got them uh, listed somewhere. But basically, any task where you have an emotional or motivational influence um, is a hot executive
Mm-hmm.
function task.
Mm-hmm.
And what we noticed as well was people with FASD had damage to certain parts of their brain that would deal with these hot executive functions, like for example the orbital frontal cortex and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which are essential for basically learning decision outcomes and being able to sort of recalibrate your actions. And yeah, it was quite an interesting paper for me to write.
Yeah. Yeah. I find myself wondering if you would see different impacts, different regions of the brain, and how that plays into all this, depending on at what gestational point during the pregnancy the alcohol exposure happens,
Yeah, it would be very
right?
interesting.
It seems as though the effects for adaptive behavior are much broader and problematic than effects that impact intelligence, right? But I'm curious if the timing of exposure would lean one person, or it might lean you more toward criminality because you were talking about justice leading people into that way, or into being versus leaning toward victimization.
Yeah,
Whereas,
it'd be a very interesting study, but I must admit I have not read or come across anything
that's
similar
why
to
it
that.
needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. That's the research for somebody.
Yeah, yeah. Someone needs to blaze that trail.
Yeah, there is research that does suggest that, for example, if you don't get an early diagnosis, you obviously can develop secondary disabilities that obviously can lead to things like criminality, etc., etc. But it doesn't take obviously into consideration the timing of the prenatal alcohol exposure.
Right. And I think too, something that's missing is maybe identifying all the mitigating factors, right? Because you have, like in my family, there's three of us kids. I'm the youngest. My mom, when I went to her and asked, "Did you drink while you were pregnant?" She, "Oh yeah, every day." You know, it was the 1960s. Nobody knew any better.
Mm.
But early in her marriage, she and Pop would drink a whole lot more than by the
Mhm.
time here I am, kid number three. And the impacts on my oldest brother are very different than the impacts of
Mhm.
upon me. But all of us are very bright, you know, but the social aspects are play out very differently. And I think we've had different mitigating factors, one child to the next, right? As you often see with looking at birth order, it would just be really interesting to see that and to see more attention paid to what mitigating factors were there. Because, you know, I've gone on and have three master's degrees. You know, intelligence isn't necessarily the problem, but it does lead to a lot of secondary things, you know, with people placing judgment like, how could you ever think that was okay? You're smarter than that, right? And
Mhm.
I know if I've experienced that, so have a whole lot of other people,
I was going
right?
to say there's going to be a lot of people out there with the same sort of experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So what else? And this is going to be your last project before you graduate, right?
So I've actually got one after this. I've got
Really?
obviously got the adults, the children, and then my director of studies is she's got a computational model essentially of the attention task that we're running. So hopefully we're going to be able to run it through the computational model and get even like further insight into the differences. Hopefully. That's the
Okay.
plan. Whether it materializes, who knows? We shall see.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm tickled to death that you can get your PhD in 3 years, I think. Is that
Yeah,
what
and you can complete it quicker. If you can do it quicker, I've heard of cases 2.5 years.
when I was my master or my bachelor's was social work and but I was minoring in psych at the time. Then I got a master's in psych, my first master's. And so I have a master's and I never took a lab. Isn't that bizarre? I never had experiential psychology.
Oh, really?
So what do you plan on doing after you get your doctorate degree? Are you going
I
to
mean,
stay in research?
the goal would be to stay in research. I
Okay.
actually really enjoy the topic of FASD. So hopefully stick towards FASD to some degree, whether it's still in, improving diagnosis from ADHD or whether
Hmm.
it's just FASD or something completely different but related to FASD. I'm not too fussed, but as long as it's something around FASD, that's the
What is
hope.
okay? What is it about FASD that captured your heart?
I think it's just the few people that I've met with it so far. I think their life story and how like inspiring. Obviously, I've met some of the advocates. I just think how inspiring they are.
Okay.
And knowing that you can make a difference in somebody's life. Like everyone researches, there's a lot of research on ADHD, on autism, and it feels like although FASD is just as big, it's just not
Yeah.
as not as well recognized. I feel like I know it has more purpose for me rather than to chase the ADHD or the
Okay.
autism side of things.
Okay. All right. Well, we will definitely be the benefactors of your passion. So what else has really caught your interest beyond the hot and cold aspects of executive functioning?
I mean, I've really enjoyed reading
Hmm.
all the research in general. All the research captures my attention to some degree. I think just executive functions in general, I
Hmm.
think is where my heart lies.
Okay.
But I also do really enjoy the attention aspect
Okay.
um, of it. I'd probably say those two. But then again, just meeting people and you know
Yeah.
advocates, etc. I think that's the best part about it for me.
Okay. So when you were in school, you just stumbled into FASD?
Pretty much, it
No,
was just it
really?
was it was a they had like a list of VRA projects, and there was all sorts. There was like dyslexia, ADHD, autism, etc., loads on the
Mhm.
list. And my personal tutor was the one running the study for the FASD and ADHD
Okay.
systematic review. And I was like, oh, I'll just apply just in case, whatever. Missed the deadline, bear in mind. And I emailed him after saying, oh, I did submit my application. I submitted a couple of days late.
Mm.
And they put me on this, and then I just just stuck for some reason, and here I am.
Okay. Well, I believe things work out the way they do for a reason. So
100%.
yeah, yeah. You're where you're supposed to be. Have there been any surprises so far in the work that you've done?
To be fair, coming into because I didn't do a master's degree, I came straight from undergraduate to PhD.
Okay.
The amount of different thinking you've got to do in terms of to actually get a study up and running rather than, you know, lecturers being, oh, you need to do X, Y, and Z. It's more you need to do X, Y, and Z before you present even your idea to lecturers. So it's a lot
Okay.
different. But in terms of FASD, like I think it's just because I knew nothing coming in. Everything is
Hmm.
already new to me, other than you shouldn't drink when you're pregnant. That was it when I was coming into the
Yeah.
PhD before writing my proposal and stuff like that. And obviously
Yeah.
just learning about all the different, effects on the brain, the body,
Mm.
etc. I think it's just mind blowing to me. I never would have thought it.
Alcohol could do so much damage.
Yeah, and the prevalence
Yeah.
as well. Like I was completely shocked that it's more prevalent than autism, for example, because autism is this huge thing, and same with
Mhm.
ADHD, and
Mhm.
it's just as
Yeah.
prevalent, if not more prevalent.
Yeah, the current research for the states is 7.1%, translates to 1 in 14.
Crazy. That means two in every
Yeah.
classroom.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. Or 2 in every boardroom, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't outgrow this. So what I'm still very curious about the hot and cold executive functioning. I'm going to pull you back into that again. The bits you were bringing up had to do with the research itself. And to be fair, as a researcher, of course. Whereas I'm more pound the pavement. Let's
Mm.
talk about the practical, what does that mean in our daily lives? So you gave us a really good example of the cold decision making. What about what kinds of situations do people find themselves in that would be more of the classic hot executive functioning?
So things like anything to do with problematic behavior. So for example, criminality is probably the most obvious one, um, in terms of getting in trouble with the law, um, setting fire to things, etc. Misbehaving in school. I had a whole list of them. But the sort of practical element to the theoretical narrative, I guess, is you can translate the effect because cold and hot operate on a scale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a continuum, so you can kind of it's like a practical framework for basically plotting the effect of prenatal alcohol exposure on the brain on the impact of executive functions, and then you can link different hot and cold executive functions to different symptoms.
Okay.
And then by doing so, you can identify basically what treatments people need, or even on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can start developing treatments tailored towards different effects that alcohol has on the brain. Is kind of the position I argue from.
Okay.
It's yeah, it's very interesting. It's yeah, I don't know how
So,
to explain
okay.
it.
So I find myself, I mean, my mind's just going, right? If an example of someone, you gave a good example of, like what it looks like in a kid or in criminality, but there's a huge space in between, right? I was never in trouble either in school or with the law, but so there's a lot of people like me who have never been close to those kinds of behaviors and yet still have this type of struggle where their impulses fail them, lead them to taking a spontaneously deciding to go do something over lunch break
Yeah,
and not returning to work, right? Or until like mid afternoon when they should have been back, 2 hours previously, and not realizing there's consequences to that,
yeah.
and being caught off guard by that. Would that be an example?
Yeah, you could class that as a hot executive function, I guess, to some degree, because there's a motivation to not go back because you might be preoccupied with, I don't know, going to the cinema instead or something like that. There's a
Mm-hmm.
motivational factor for um your decision to not go
Mm-hmm.
back to work. But it's interesting as well. So when we were writing this paper, we noticed that obviously the theory is you have your cold, which is your lateral prefrontal cortex, which contains your dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, and your ventral lateral prefrontal cortex, which are more your cold executive functions. And then you've got your hot executive functions, which is your orbital frontal cortex and ventral medial prefrontal cortex. But it's kind of like a loop in
Hmm.
between, and it bypasses, so one system to the other bypasses the brain region called the anterior cingulate cortex. And basically, for to function optimally as a human, you need to use both cold
Hmm.
and hot executive
Hmm.
functions. Whereas prenatal alcohol exposure has shown to basically damage the anterior cingulate cortex. So these two systems also don't
Okay.
communicate between each other, and that's when you lead to sort of these.
That's very interesting. So I again, I would be very curious to go back and find out, is that specific part of the brain damaged irregardless of gestational age at time of exposure? Or is it coincidental that most of the research study participants happen to have a similar time of exposure? You know
Yeah,
what I
that would
mean?
be an interesting question to answer, but that's another piece of research for someone to do.
Right? You don't want another PhD?
I'll settle for just the one.
I love thinking outside the box and coming up with these ideas, but I'm not in a position to study these things either. So, which is why I talk about them on I was going to say radio,
No,
but
but
on the
it's good to
podcast.
bring awareness to all these different topics, and obviously, they mean a lot to you, and obviously would help you as well. So I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
important to highlight them.
Now, you mentioned the impact of this particular theory, right? The hot and the cold being helpful in determining treatment. What kinds of, and we are in very different cultures, what kinds of treatments are available in the UK?
So I believe I'm not so clued up on the treatments, I must admit, but I believe there's talking therapies that the NHS prescribes, and I think that's about the extent it goes. But I must admit, I'm not very clued up on it, so I couldn't speak
Okay.
massively on it. Mine's more on diagnosis on the at the
Yeah,
start of the start
right,
of the clinical pathway
right.
rather than the opposite end.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, here in the States, there are some that do the talk therapy, right? And then there's, I think, more toward behavioral, you
Yeah.
know, and that might be because so many of us, get the autism label, and applied behavioral analysis is the evidence-based practice
Yeah.
for ASD, but ABA does not work on a lot of the people involved in that therapy, actually. And with FASD, it's generally thought to be contraindicated,
Okay.
because it does so much damage. Because when we can't apply what they're doing consistently, then it's, well, you must be undermining it.
Hmm.
There's some secondary gain we haven't come up with. And, eventually the same messages of blame, shame, and punishment are given out to the student. Failed therapy, dropped out of therapy, wandered away. And it's because, the kids, why keep going to a place that makes you feel even worse?
I mean,
Right?
again, it makes complete sense though, doesn't it? Like if I was going to somewhere that didn't make me feel good, I wouldn't want to keep
Right?
showing up.
Right. So I'm just curious what that really looks like on a practical basis. How could we maybe better design? And part of me is like, treatment. It's like,
Hmm.
we're not broken. We don't need to be fixed.
Yeah.
You know? There's the part of that is back to the language in the mental health model, which is borrows a lot from the medical model, right? But ends up reinforcing the stigma, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's always a thing you've got to be especially careful with in terms of this sort of research is what
Yeah,
language you use,
yeah,
how you portray your uh, portrayal of people. Obviously people's right to their own body, to drink, to da da da. Yeah, you've got to be careful with how you put it.
yeah. Well, and that opens up another can of worms, doesn't it? About whose body is the baby,
Yeah,
you know? Because there's also the right to sobriety,
yeah,
which I don't know if it's like that in the UK, but in large swaths of America, for people to choose abstinence, it makes you defensive.
hmm
Like we have to defend why we don't want to drink.
yeah. I remember there was
Um,
there was guidance when I first started my PhD. My director of studies was saying about how they advised her to drink Guinness to
mhm.
uplift her iron levels, and obviously that's a no-go.
Yes.
But whether that guidance is still the same. I don't know whether it's changed. I know what I read I think it was a 2016 or something paper, and it was still the same at that point. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm focusing more on just if people
Yeah.
consume rather than the guidelines for drinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's been a lot of really interesting work done in that area. I talked with a gentleman at one point who had been one of the chief people in Alaska. There were four, I think it was four different little communities where in the bars they were giving out pregnancy tests in the restrooms.
okay.
And before a woman would get served, she had to go check to see if she was pregnant. And
Okay.
that ethically, that brings up a lot of good questions like, can we really do that? Because you're basically forcing a woman to disclose if she's pregnant or not. Yeah, that could get sticky.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the researcher I was talking to said, yeah, I've been contacted by a lot of women who went there that night not knowing and thanking me because they chose not to drink. And they still stayed and had a good time with their friends, but they did it drinking something else.
Yeah.
You
And that's
know,
the question. It's the ethical grey, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
the in one sense of the coin, it's a great thing, but on the other
mhm.
sense, it's a have you crossed an ethical line?
So we get better ability to tease out ADHD versus FASD versus comorbid conditions. How do you see that being used practically in the community?
So the studies we're doing, obviously, we've got the different groups. We hope to basically identify a pattern of performance. So obviously, like I was saying, the people with ADHD can do typically both parts of the one experiment. People with FASD can do the first part, but not the second part. So hopefully, when they run these, if they choose to, if the research obviously is goes through and manage to recruit, hopefully we'll be able to see the patterns maybe in practice,
Okay.
or maybe not. Who knows? Who knows what the results will be?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hopefully, if we can identify these patterns, hopefully it will at least question a role of prenatal alcohol exposure. And then obviously that might bring it to the clinician's mind, and they might be able to diagnose FASD instead of ADHD, or FASD and ADHD
Right.
instead of just ADHD. That allows, obviously, when you've got the tick boxes, allows for, your different treatments, your different
Yeah. Yeah.
supports
Because
to be given.
I know, having been involved with ADHD, I'm sure you know Daniel Amen. He's
I've
out of
not come across the
California.
name. I've not
Okay.
come across the name unless.
He's a big name over here in the ADHD world. One of the things, gosh, decades ago, he had a book of the 6 types of ADHD. And basically the finding at that point, like he would run all his subjects through PET scans.
Okay.
And the findings were basically that there are 6 subtypes, and not every kind of medication works for each type, right? And so understanding the type gives you a directive of which medication to use. Or one of the types didn't respond well to any meds. They needed the homeopathic ways of helping them to
Okay.
be able to create focus and everything else. And I think that would be very fascinating to think along those lines for the what comes next after your work is complete. I do think there's so much potential, but I find myself wondering for the folks that are either dual diagnosed, is there a particular medication that works better for the ADHD subjects who also happen to have FASD?
Yeah, there's a study going on at the minute. There was I think it was a protocol published this year, or it might have been last year, and basically they're evaluating the efficacy of treating core ADHD symptoms in FASD using
Mm-hmm.
ADHD medications, and whether it's a good idea or whether it's a bad idea. And I
Yeah.
think when that study comes out, I've got my notifications on, so when it comes out, I'll get a notification. It'll be a very interesting read. But there's some research at the minute that says yes, it's great. It treats some symptoms of ADHD and FASD, and then others that say, oh, actually, the evidence is too weak,
Yeah.
essentially, to make a strong
A
conclusion.
judgment
As
call one
yeah,
way or the other. Yeah.
yeah,
Because I know when I was first trained to work in this field, the admonition had been if you have all these symptoms, that are classic ADHD, if medication works, that's the diagnosis. But if it doesn't work,
Mhm.
then it's FASD. But the problem is when all the ADHD research had been done initially, coming up with the meds, they had not pulled out the FASD
And this is what I think about a lot when
right?
I read ADHD research. I think like how many could be people with FASD without the facial features,
Yeah.
and we don't know
Yeah.
because we haven't questioned a role of prenatal alcohol exposure
Right.
in the
Similar.
diagnostic.
Exactly. And similarly now, far more current with the prevalence of ASD climb in the last couple years. If they're not factoring out FASD, is that data real and meaningful?
Yeah, and I
Or
mean, it's
is
like
it,
I was reading a piece of research that suggests that the rate of alcohol misuse is supposed to rise by I think it was 2030 to 23% of the total global population. And you think like,
Mhm.
although that doesn't directly infer that there's going to be more FASD births,
Yeah.
it could indirectly mean that more people are exposed to alcohol, at least in some way. And
Hmm.
whether then that's interpreted as ADHD or
Yeah.
more FASD births is
Yeah.
another question that's, will come out in time.
Because we know that alcohol sales rose by 40%. As people had to cope with the stress of the lockdowns,
Hmm.
not being able to go to work, all that stress. And alcohol is sold to us in commercials as a stress reliever.
Hmm.
In TV shows and movies, it's a stress reliever. Drink your blues away. We also know that the rate of women drinking during pregnancy doubled in the
Oh,
years
really?
following COVID.
Right.
So, yeah, so all the neurobehavioral problematic behaviors that we're seeing, we've been expecting that on the FASD side of things
Hmm.
since the stats on alcohol sales and pregnancy, drinking while pregnant rates. We've been expecting this. It's no surprise. So there's a lot involved too on how do you get the people that are responsible for teasing these things out to listen.
Yeah. And I think it's even more, I was reading a piece of research a couple of months ago on the paternal influences where even if the mother doesn't drink, you can still pass effects on. And that
Yeah.
absolutely blew my mind when I
Yeah.
read it. I was like, I would have never have thought that if the male consumes alcohol, he can pass over some of the
Yeah.
effects of the alcohol onto the
We just
unborn
can't
child.
call it FASD, but it is.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it was absolutely great. It was a brilliant read, and it brought so much awareness. I'm thinking like, how many males drink before conception is probably
Mhm.
it's got to be very high at least.
There again, the messaging we get. It's in all the movies. Sex and romance, alcohol, they go together. It's a social lubricant for people like me who's I seem very social and confident in everything in the podcast or when I'm talking with a group of people I already know. But
Yeah.
in a large group, yeah, my back's on the wall. I'm a wallflower.
Oh, really?
So, alcohol does limber people up and make them social. It reduces their ability to rein in their impulses and
Uh,
changes their decision making. So, I mean, all these things go hand in hand.
it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
It's very, very
Yeah,
difficult.
and I'm not going to judge anyone who wants to use alcohol. That's everyone's right. That's everyone's
Hmm.
choice. But I do think I wholeheartedly support one of my guests. She's been on a couple times, Dr. Susan Rich. Very, very passionate on this. If you are capable physically of procreating, then you need to be very intentional
Hmm.
about your behaviors, right? And definitely use contraception.
Hmm.
Unless you're actively planning and you need to, both parties, mom and dad, need to be sober for 3 months.
I mean, for
But
me, it's crazy. Like a lot of people ask me, when you go to social events or people obviously ask you naturally, what do you do for work? And obviously I tell them about my PhD. And they're like, what's FASD? And like I remember at one point I was that person who was like, what's FASD as well?
uh,
And then you mention it to them like, it's when people drink when they're pregnant, etc., etc. And they're like, yeah, I knew you shouldn't drink, but I didn't know what FASD was. And they're just like mind blown at, the effects of alcohol, what it
mhm,
can have on obviously the
mhm,
developing fetus. Um,
yeah,
and obviously I'm from I've read the research. But they're just
yeah,
they're just astounded by
yeah,
like how much effect.
yeah, yeah. And that's even more surprising is when you educate people about all the comorbid conditions,
Hmm.
letting them, and a lot of the statistics that we toss out during FASD Awareness Month, um, they are meant to make people go, wow, and be somewhat alarmist. Yeah. About like the rates of criminality and that kind of thing. But there's so much more to the story than that. It's not that anyone is, genetically programmed by alcohol to commit crimes. It's their behavior has been unsupported for so long. They have been unsupported. The causes, no structures, no accommodations, no nothing.
Yeah.
Sink or swim, make it work.
But there was one piece of research I read, I can't remember what the exact figure was, but of all the settings they measured FASD in, it was like 10 to 40 times more prevalent in people who grew up in care or were in the criminal justice system. And you just think like it's so concentrated in these populations. Maybe there's, I mean, more work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And the stats are varied all over the place, even in those narrowed populations as well. On the one hand, there are people saying that it's no more than 70% of kids in foster care. But on the other hand, you've got the Child Welfare League of America saying 95% of kids in care are there because of drugs. I started my career in drugs and alcohol. I never met a client who did not also drink. But the discussion about that is not there because alcohol is legal.
Yeah.
And it's embraced by society.
It's almost like a social norm.
It really is. I mean, across cultures.
In British culture, it's like, you finish on Friday night, where you going? Let's go to the pub. It's just, it's one of those. And that's probably why the rate of consumption is so high in the UK. It's something like 25 per 1,000 or something like that. I can't remember quite what it is now from that one global study. It's a lot.
But if you look too at the pregnancy rates across society, I don't know what it is in the UK. Here in the States, it's nearly 50%, 45, 50%. Here, Canada, I mean, pretty equivalent rates. And so much of that is in the college age, where drinking is part of campus life.
Yeah, same over here, university life. A lot of people drink days a week as well.
Yeah. And they're not making the best of decisions.
No.
Even just based on their ages.
Yeah.
Letting alcohol have nothing to do with it. I mean, it's still a very vulnerable time, right?
No, 100%. They're still maturing.
Yep. All right. So I'm really excited about your research.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see how it all shakes out, and I hope I get a copy of your paper when you're done.
You will do.
And I hope you get to spread your message across other podcasts as well. So just call to action, everybody watching and listening. If you are an adult living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, please open up the show notes and click on that email address and get in touch with Todd and be part of something meaningful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Todd, I'm so glad you came to spend time with me today.
Not a problem at all. Thank you for having me.
I hope you found today's candid conversation to be enjoyable, hopefully humorous. Definitely, I hope you found it valuable in terms of adding to the depth and breadth of your knowledge about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. It is my honor and great pleasure to bring more perspectives and more information to you week by week. I want to thank you for being a valuable part of this podcast family. And please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you follow me on so that more people can discover the show and learn more about FASD in the process. If you want to reach out to today's guest, please check the show notes for their contact information, any links that they provided for me to share with you. Also, there will be links for the things that I have to offer. For instance, any professional development training or community organization training that you might be interested in ranging for, or coaching services for yourself as a neurodivergent adult or as a parent of a little. Please check out my website at patriciakasper.com. And if you want to pick up a copy of my book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with Adults Living with FASD, you can do so at books.by/yourfasdcoach or on Amazon. Okay, that is a wrap. I want to thank you again for showing up week after week. I hope you really enjoyed today's candid conversation, and we'll see you next time. Take care.